Good morning, everybody. So, today we are talking about the Enlightenment. I'm going to go through what is basically it's like one of these things, right? It's this right here. Okay, we're gonna go through this. I put it together in a different format today. I'm hoping it's a little easier to understand since I'm doing this as a video presentation. So you don't have to take notes. This is not an assignment. This is just background information on the Enlightenment, which is what your next few assignments are going to be a part of. Okay, this is our final unit of the year, so I wanted to give you guys some info on that. Let me go ahead and shrink up this picture of me here, this video, and we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the final unit. It is the Enlightenment. Here we go. All right, so what is the Enlightenment? Okay, so the Enlightenment was a European intellectual movement, mainly led by France. Okay, so when we hear about the philosophers in the Enlightenment, we'll often call them philosophes because that is the French word for philosopher. So it's an intellectual movement of the late 17th and 18th centuries, so the 16 and 1700s, emphasizing reason and individualism rather than tradition. So things are shifting. Okay, it's an awakening. Um, it is heavily influenced by 17th century philosophers or philosophes such as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Baron de Montesquieu. And we're going to be studying their ideas in the upcoming assignment. So, how did people perceive the everyday world before the Enlightenment? Okay, so before the Enlightenment, people were much more likely to think that things like natural disasters were connected to human events. So, society was misbehaving or people were misbehaving, and as a result, God was punishing people. Okay, so that's what they used to think. People saw God and religion as a guiding factor in their everyday lives. Okay, so they thought God was much more involved in their lives than they would think after the Enlightenment, or much differently than how people see the world now, at least as far as God being involved in their lives. After the Enlightenment, people began to view these natural disasters differently. They began asking questions about why these natural disasters might be happening. Okay, or they might have noticed, um, in the Americas, they never seem to have hurricanes. Um, we have them every year in this part of the world, or Asia has typhoons. Meanwhile, they're not happening over here. So maybe it's not God punishing people. Maybe it's just something that happens on certain parts of the planet, right? um, Earthquakes, another one, right? We have earthquakes in California. We don't have hurricanes or floods ever, right? But then other parts of the world, sorry, I know it's loud when I clear my throat. I'm going to try to stop doing that. um, Meanwhile, in other parts of the United States, they have hurricanes every year, but they never have earthquakes. So maybe it's not God, maybe it's something else. Okay, those are the kinds of ideas that start being thrown around during the Enlightenment. So, what type of social environment allowed the Enlightenment to happen? What type of social environment allowed the Enlightenment to happen? So, abundance and novelty become a regular part of European life. They're no longer starving. Okay. And like I've said all year, when people don't have to worry about their safety and don't have to worry about where they're getting their food from, it becomes a lot easier to focus on things like creativity and higher level, more intellectual ideas. Okay. Another big change was tea and coffee. So people began to behave a little more civilly towards each other. They're a little more sober. Let me have some tea here. This is green tea. Good stuff. Here's my other caffeine source here, throwing it back to when we were all at Stella together. Um, so the tea and coffee trades um, make those drinks popular in Europe. People aren't drinking as much alcohol. They used to drink alcohol like beer throughout the day. It wasn't very strong. It would be weak beer. But they used to drink it because it was safer than water sometimes because it had alcohol in it, so it wouldn't grow certain bacteria. Um, so they were kind of stuck drinking that sometimes, and yeah, it's gonna give your day a different start if you're having a couple beers for breakfast instead of a couple coffees, right? So basically, Europe is not on the brink of starvation anymore, and that's great. Right now, you can do other things. So people began trusting their own ideas more than the teachings of the church, just because they had more time to think about things, pretty much. So what did people question during the Enlightenment? What kinds of questions did they have? So they began asking things like, how should people of different social classes relate to each other? Okay, what should the relationship be like between ordinary people and their government? Or how should trade and manufacturing function? So what what should economics be like? Should we let people buy and sell whatever they want? Should the government control how much is shipped in? Should they control the prices? Things like that were questioned. Okay, so the reason these questions came up is because Europeans have been traveling throughout the world at this point. Okay, so people across Asia, what the Europeans noticed, sorry, is that people across Asia treated their neighbors differently. Um, and what I mean by this is just a regular person and family living in one house and another regular family living in another house. Their relationship was maybe more community based than what it was like in Europe. And Europeans saw this and they thought, you know what, it would be nice if we just were like that at home too. Rules like the right of way on roads came from Asia. So what you notice a lot, even if you're just walking down, the halls in school or a sidewalk, is that people will go to the right side. So if this is someone coming this way and this is another person going that way, they don't walk towards each other. They will go to their right and then they walk past each other, right? That came from Asia. Before this, people kind of would, especially if it was like horses, they would just argue, okay, you got to move. I have more horses, or I'm more important. You have to get off the road for a second while I come by. Something else that Europeans had noticed is that not all social orders were hierarchical. Okay, so in other societies on other continents, it didn't always matter what family you were from or how much land you had. Okay, in other continents, it wasn't uncommon for people to receive privilege because of their skills and talents, not because of who their parents were. Okay, so there was an incentive to learn things and an incentive to be good at something because your society, sorry, your society would, consider you to be a hero or important, or you could gain wealth because you had these skills. It wasn't just because of who your parents were or how much land your parents had. Okay, if that was the case, people wouldn't try to be good at things because they wouldn't have to be good at things. They would just get that position. They would just get power because their families were powerful or because their families had wealth. Okay? People began questioning that. They didn't like that idea so much. So, the Enlightenment thinkers, they used observation and reason to support their ideas, and this was borrowed from Francis Bacon's idea of the scientific method. Okay, so we're using observations and data. We're not just trusting what someone else, like Aristotle, said, right? So Thomas Hobbes talks about absolute rule by kings. Okay, Thomas Hobbes is an Enlightenment thinker, but he does think that um, mankind can't really be trusted. Okay, he thinks mankind is naturally cruel. Everyone's got a desire for power, and government is necessary in order to maintain order. Okay, in order to make sure that people don't go crazy with power. The issue with that, though, is that people who want this power, and Thomas Hobbes would say everybody wants power, could end up in the government, and as a result, they have the power they want and they can abuse it, right? John Locke talks about natural rights. Okay, he believes that kings did not have the divine right to rule, meaning that they weren't put in power by God. And he believes that the government should be based on a social contract among free people in order to protect people's natural rights. So a social contract is sort of like a constitution, okay? A written set of laws, and everybody follows those laws as opposed to whatever the king says. Even the king has to follow those written laws that the people have agreed upon. Okay, so it limits the power of the people in leadership positions. Baron de Montesquieu thought that there needs to be a separation of powers. Okay, so it shouldn't be one person or one group of people doing, creating the laws and then enforcing the laws, and explaining what the laws mean. So he decides there should be three branches for ruling. Okay, one for making the laws, one for enforcing the laws, and one for interpreting the laws. Um, and if you guys have heard anything yet about it, you'll know that the United States is known for having a separation of powers. Okay, and you'll learn about that more in eighth grade. But what we see here are the beginnings of the ideas that would that would guide the United States. Okay, the United States was heavily based on the separation of powers and heavily based on a social contract, the Constitution, in order to limit the power of our leaders and make sure that people have their natural rights intact. Okay, so without the Enlightenment, there probably would not have been a formation, or the United States would not have been formed if it weren't for the ideas of the Enlightenment, because the United States is based on Enlightenment thinking. Okay, so the impact of the Enlightenment, um, in a few different ways here. We have monarchs. Okay, so even the kings and queens in power begin to agree with these ideas. Okay, they start questioning why they have so much power, and whether there aren't, a lot of people that could be making these decisions, or whether people can be trusted to change laws in government. And they start thinking, we probably could trust the average person to write their own laws and propose them and vote on them and things like that. So these people who are in power began opening universities and scientific societies, and they began spreading the ideas of the Enlightenment through their education, um, through the education that's provided at these universities. John Locke's ideas inspire the American Declaration of Independence, and Montesquieu's idea of the separation of powers inspires the U.S. Constitution. Um, a document on liberty and equality is called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, spreads in France, and it causes a revolution, the French Revolution, where thousands of aristocrats are killed. That goes a little bit crazy in France. Okay, a lot of people end up getting killed, but overall, what we see is that the world is shifting. Okay, during this couple hundred years, the world is shifting away from trusting the religious leaders at all times, or political leaders at all times, and people are starting to think for themselves, and that's the impact of the Enlightenment. And I'll say it again: it is the ideas of the Enlightenment that led to the creation of the United States, and that's why I've been saying these last three units are sort of a prequel of events that leads to um, a world where the United States can be formed and people are going to believe in its ideas and want to live there, right? Um, and even if they don't want to come to the United States, they want the ideas of the Enlightenment to be evident in their governments wherever they live. They want to have a little more power, maybe limit the power of the people in government positions, and people are hoping they'll be treated a little more equally. Okay, so that's really what the Enlightenment was about. Um, I'm going to post a video also for the assignment that's coming up. You'll be looking over the ideas of some of the people we mentioned here on this video. Um, Again, I miss you all. I hope you can come by my office hours and we can hang out a little bit. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.